I'm Catherine Sheeran, host of the podcast Horse Tales with Cat. Our guest today hails from Cayley, Alberta. Dustin Gonnet is a Hall of Fame cutting trainer as well as the owner of Gonnet Performance Horses. He is the first Canadian trainer to have surpassed $2 million in cutting earnings, an achievement that happened just last year at Black Elk Cutting Classic in August in Ponoka, Alberta. Dustin, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I always like to lead with, how did you come to horses? What led you to doing what you're doing?
The horse deal I was born into, my dad ran a community pasture. It was a PFRA community pasture. It was run by the federal government. So it was basically a government-owned ranch where patrons could bring their cattle for the summer, and my dad would look after them. And then also, I don't remember what year, but because we had lots of water there, they started a bull station. So in the wintertime, my dad would feed, I think when I left was probably about 300 bulls in the winter. And, they'd buy bull calves. They had a program. And so, when I was 19, I moved to Alberta to do this cutting horse thing. And I didn't even really know how to run a tractor because my dad did everything with a team of horses. So growing up, that's all we did was, I rode colts. I started riding colts for the public when I was 11. And then my dad would buy a bunch of colts too. And I'd start them and he'd use some of them on the pasture. And when I was 16, I went on my own to Cowboy on the PFRA pastures because there was, and I don't quote me because I don't totally remember. It's been so long, but I think there was like 86 pastures throughout Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta at one time. So anyways, I did that for 3 years till I was about 19-ish, 19, 20, something like that. And then I had taken a clinic. My dad and I had bought a mare out of a sale that had some cutting breeding in it, had like 10 months worth of cutting training, and by Doug Reinhardt. And so at that time, compared to what we've been riding, when we got her home and I worked her on a cow, I worked her on some bulls that were in the bull station, and felt one that could work a cow. Of course, it was the coolest thing we'd ever had up to that point. So I ended up taking a clinic from Doug Reinhardt that fall, I believe, is when I went to work for him. And I was originally just going to start colts and was trying to get out of the Saskatchewan winters. Was going to go back cowboying in the spring. And honestly, if it wasn't for Marla, I probably would have, but she convinced me to stay. She's like, well, you really enjoy it. You can go back cowboying anytime you want. So why not try this cutting horse deal for a while? And I did. And then, I've never looked back. So that was 20 some years ago, I guess, when I did that. So that's kind of the short version of how it happened.
Well, it's interesting because it seems to me it's a natural extension of what you were doing. You're a legitimate cowboy in terms of you were doing cutting cattle, presumably as part of your day-to-day life. And so then to move to the sport of it would seem to me to make perfect sense. Am I?
Oh yeah. So again, my dad's pretty cowboy to the bone, so and again, I don't remember how many people brought cattle to that pasture, but for example, in a field, there might be 400 pairs in a field, and that might be 12 different patrons or 12 different owners. So when in the fall, we'd gather everything up and either hold them up in the field or hold them up in a fence corner, and we'd sort them a horseback. So dad would tell us, okay, we're going to sort so-and-so's cattle, and we'd have to go there and pair them up, make sure the cow and the calf were together and bring them out. You were never allowed to bring one cow or one calf at a time. They had to be a pair, and then we'd sort them from the herd and then go take them and hold them up in a set of pens or something. We'd do that in the morning. Then usually that afternoon, once we got our count on everything, the patrons would come get their cows. So before I got into the cutting, we kind of knew what cutting was about, I guess, but we did that every day. Like even during the summer, if something happened, we had to sort of cow and a calf off for somebody or whatever. We did it all the time. So it was maybe more than the original natural way of cutting. And then, when I moved into the sport, I'm not saying it was ever easy, but once I understood the fundamentals of cutting and how the game was played, the actual cutting part becomes a little bit more second nature for me because I've done it since I was real little. So
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about this big achievement of earning over $2 million in the sport, because from what I understand, that's a huge accomplishment as a Canadian living trainer, in that you still live in Canada. I gather it can happen more consistently when trainers are living down in the States because you have exposure to bigger purses. Tell me a little bit about what that meant. As it's been explained to me, that's huge because you're winning $2,000-3,000 at a time. So to have amassed over 20 years, over 2 million just in that sport is a huge deal. How did that come about and how did you feel when that happened?
Well, if I'm going to be totally honest, a lot of it was by accident. But when I started in the sport, like obviously the first real achievement is when you hit $1 million in lifetime earnings, that you do get inducted into the Hall of Fame
Okay.
in NCHA standards, like as a whole association. You're recognized. We went to conference in, I can't remember where it was, Weatherford, I think, and they do give you a plaque and whatnot for doing that. But to get over 2 million, and that was really good when I made the Hall of Fame. Don't get me wrong, I will never forget that, being able to stand up on the stage in front of basically all your heroes, the guys that you watch on the big scale. And at that time I was competing against those guys quite a bit. And so that was pretty cool to be able to do that. When I hit the 2 million deal, it was a different deal because nobody had done it up here, like you say. And so it was pretty interesting, but I have to admit, a lot of things that I do they never start out being a goal till I get kind of close. And then it becomes a goal because I'm pretty busy doing a whole bunch of different things all the time, more than the cutting. So I don't always think about that stuff till Marla usually says, "Hey, you're getting kind of close to this. Maybe you should try and achieve this or try and achieve that." And then once I put my mind to it, I usually get it pretty fast after that, because I get a little bit, I'll kind of bird dog something if I get on it. So when she told me I was getting close to 2 million, yeah, it meant a lot that I got it done because nobody up here had done it yet. So it's a record that don't mean much to anybody but me, other than I'll get to keep it forever, because there's lots of young trainers coming up they'll dang sure beat me as far as earnings go one day, but nobody will ever take away that I got to do it first. So kind of cool. That was quite cool for me anyways.
Well, and it was interesting for me to see. I was hoping you could explain to me a little bit about how this works. I understand that you, your wife Marla, and your son Destry run a successful grass cattle management in the summer months, as well as, it says, background cattle in the winter. Would these be cattle that are bred for meat or for milk?
So yes, it'd be all for meat. It was another one of those deals that kind of we fell into it because of a couple different situations. And one of it was the cutting. Obviously, to train our horses, we need a certain amount of cattle. I was starting to buy my own cattle. At first, when we get into this sport, we were just renting maybe 30, 40 head at a time from neighbors and ranchers and stuff around here. And that worked okay. But again, that's always money out of my pocket. There was no chance of kind of making any money at it. Well, then I got into buying some cattle to do it myself. And at the time it was maybe 100 or 200 at a time, and had a little bit of success at that. And it was obviously give me the opportunity to make a little money on the sidelines besides working my cutting horses. When COVID hit, I was kind of already starting to buy quite a few cattle. Like I was maybe buying 400 or 500 maybe by then. When COVID hit, nobody knew what we were going to do. Shows were on, not on. I'm not the person to sit around and wait for somebody to tell me how things were going to go. So then I started buying a lot of cattle and feeding cattle in the winter, getting more grass and different things. So in the summer, these cattle will go to grass, and then we take them off grass, say end August, 1st September type deal. And sometimes I'll try to buy a lighter weight animal so that I can keep them into October, so I have cattle to work my horses on. But it's became another job and another business between the feedlot and grass and these cattle. But once they leave me in August, September, they'll go to a different feedlot. I usually sell them. We don't keep ownership after that. I'm basically the middleman from the producer to the feedlots that they'll go there weighing 1,000 pounds, say, and then they go on and fatten them to go to the plants after that. But I just kind of made a business out of being the middleman as far as having enough cattle to work my horses on. And I always had the theories, if I was going to feed 100, I might as well feed 1,000. I can make more money feeding 1,000. It's nothing huge, but it is, as far as the cutting horse deal up here on cutting horse trainers. Yes, it's big, but it's, as far as cattle feeding business, I'm pretty tiny little bit.
Right, but I was thinking it was actually a very clever approach. You're managing to supply yourself with cattle to practice with, as well as make an income from them. I think that was a very clever idea. I don't know if anybody else was doing it, but
Well, it's a lot of work, and I'll be honest, if I didn't have Marlin Industry, it'd be really hard because I'd have to have a lot of hired men, and that's getting harder to find anywhere in any business. But a lot of what I do is because of them, or I'm allowed to get away with it because I have them. They work as hard as I do or harder, and that makes it good for the whole team, whole business.
Mhm. Can you also tell me a little bit about Gonnet performance horses? Do you actually breed, or is that your training end of things? I wasn't quite sure.
It's both actually. So Marlo does the breed. Like obviously, I do all the training. Destry is now starting to help me do quite a bit of that also. So he'll ride quite a few of the horses when I'm busy or with me, whether he's turning back or riding something else. Marlo does all the breeding side of it. We do have a stud now of our own that we raised. The whole breeding thing started from a mare. This cat's got style that Ron Patton and I owned, and that was the horse that really put me on the map as far as a large scale goes, because I ended up winning. They had a cutting in Weatherford, Texas in 2015 called the slot cutting. And it was for any aged horse. And there was only 74 horses, I think, entered in it, something like that. And they only took 15 to the top. Top 15 went to the finals, no ties, and it paid 75,000 to win. And it was probably the toughest cutting in the world because it was all experienced horses. I mean, don't get me wrong, the fraternity is very tough, but you're dealing with 3-year-olds. So a lot of luck got to come with the 3-year-olds to win. This was 75 of the best horses in the world. Guys weren't walking to the herd going, oh, I hope my horse behaves today. These are horses that had won hundreds of thousands of dollars. That mare really put me on the map. I ended up winning that deal. And that mare went on. She won almost 200,000, like I think 196, 197,000. Marlo ended up purchasing that mare from Ron Patton here. I don't know how many years ago now, but we've ride a lot of colts out. I think I'm about to start the 5th one out of her. There's a weanling underneath that one, so there's 6 of them. So that mare's really the backbone of our breeding deal. And then we have another mare that Marla had showed more than I did, and that mare won about 75 or 76,000. Again, we've had 4 or 5 colts out of her, and they've all been doing really well. Lots of times I try to sell them colts to a customer so that I can train them and then protect the integrity of the mares to make sure we knew what the colts were going to be like before we started selling them to the public. This year is the first year we've just sold one of those colts to a fellow in Arizona, and we're in the process on some other horse deals with some of them mares. We got some other mares here too that are more ranchy type mares, like either mares that I used as a turnback horse in the cutting deal, or I got another cutting mare here that I won maybe 18,000 on a long time ago. And we got a few of them around that we've been breeding to our stud or outside studs, because our stud is out of the cat mare and by raising the cash. So obviously we can only breed him to certain mares that we have. It's just a little venture that Marlo does, and we're just kind of getting to the point where now we're really going to start, that's going to start blossoming into another business, as far as every year having a couple colts that are that the public's going to be able to buy. Because like I said, now I've rode enough of them, I can tell everybody exactly what those colts are going to be like. That's just how I decided to do it. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I really wanted to make sure I knew those colts were good before I sold them to the public. Because in my business, I'd seen a lot of mares over the years, in my opinion, get mismanaged that were really good mares. This industry is a good industry, but it's also cutthroat. Those mares don't get a lot of chances to be famous, is the wrong word, but to be producers, I guess, is maybe a better way to put it. And if those colts get in the wrong hands and don't get trained, there's been some good mares that have fell through the cracks that were actually probably going to produce some good horses, but they get forgot about real fast because of just mismanagement. And I didn't happen to our mares. So obviously I was in a position I could be the one that managed it for the first 3-4 years here. In my opinion, it's allowed our mares now to have a pretty good track record. So when I go to start selling them colts, they're worth something.
You have made me curious. I have a couple of questions just based on what you shared. What makes a good cutting horse? Traditionally, my understanding is they tend to be quarter horses because they're short backed. And the other thing you mentioned, colts. So is it preferable to have a colt over a male to do the job?
The cutting horse we do breed them for this sport. I don't know how much you know, say about working dogs or whatever, but that's another business of mine that I grew up in. Our good friend Amanda's gotten into the working dogs, and the cutting horses is the same kind of thing. Yet not just any quarter horse can go be a cutting horse. They got to be bred for it. They got to have the natural ability to do it. You kind of chip away at the good things and discourage the bad things, so to speak, in the training. But you definitely need to start out. It's like I can't go take a Pertrain and make them cut or something like that. I have to have certain bloodlines. Now there's always freak of natures anywhere. I mean, when I started, I mean, we rode some horses that technically were not maybe the bred the best, but they worked a cow and they worked it good enough to become cutting horses. Nowadays, the sport has gotten really tough. Like the competition's awesome. The level of competition's really rose, the trainers, the horses. So now you do need to have a horse that's bred a certain way to have a chance of it turning out to be a really good cutting horse. And then as far as like fillies, geldings, studs, everybody has their preference on maybe that answer to your question. As far as I'm concerned, a good horse is a good horse. I don't care if it's a stud, a gelding, a mare. If they're good, they're good. At the end of the day, I could sit here and tell you lots of stories about great studs, geldings, mares, and some terrible studs, geldings, and mares. So I've really grown up in the dog world and in the cowboy world. It's a good horse is a good horse, no matter what they are. You know, the cowboy world's probably a little bit leans towards the geldings and stuff, but I'll be honest, I've had a lot of tremendous great mares. So I really am not fussy about what I ride as long as it's a good one.
And what are some of the characteristics that make them special, the good ones?
It really, to me, it boils down to heart. I mean, obviously, their ability to breed a cow needs to be very good. At the end of the day, it will boil down to their heart. Some of my best horses maybe weren't always the most talented athletes, but they were extremely smart about a cow, and extremely big hearted. Like I had a mare that not that many years ago. I think we ended up winning somewhere between 100 and 110,000 on her. I can't remember exactly. And yeah, she was not maybe the most talented mare I'd ever rode, but what we call maybe a tiny bit limited. She didn't move her front end maybe as clean as you'd like. But as far as grit, heart, determination, and smarts about a cow, she's one of the best. I'll take that any day over one that's a super athlete and not very good minded.
That's so fascinating because I talked to a jumper trainer a week ago, and that was one of the things she mentions is her number one requirement in a horse is heart. So I think, isn't that interesting that that crosses different sport lines?
Yeah, I think a lot of things, equine and like I said, in our world, we deal with the dogs and stuff a lot, obviously. Anybody that deals with an animal that you're relying on their instincts and their ability that we've bred them for, it'll always boil down to how much heart they got. Because one thing, it's like the saying says, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And that's, to me, is really true in everything. You can't, like I said, I can't just go buy any horse and make them cut. But if you give me that one that wants to cut, I can just try and not screw it up and make them a good one, sort of thing.
So I'm curious too, with the nature of what a cutting horse does, are there repetitive type injuries that are associated with that? I guess in my mind right away, I'm thinking is perhaps it would be difficult on the hocks. Would it? Am I correct in that? And
Yeah.
if so, how do you alleviate that? I guess that repetitive nature, like you have to do special exercises.
I totally get what you're saying, and I'll try and make it not a long-winded answer because it's been one thing that I've tried to pride myself on. I don't have a lot of horses that get crippled, but we do. I mean, it is one of those things. Hocks, stifles, definitely, I would say, are the two main places that get injured. I will admit, for me and how I train, stifles are probably one area. If I'm going to hurt one, it's going to be in a stifle, or I should say. Most of that's because I make my horses, really stop hard and draw back, get on their hocks a lot. But occasionally, another common one, knock on wood, I haven't had very many of them. Like I think maybe one or two two in my whole career is suspensories. A lot of front suspensories, guys have hind suspensories, some too. I do think that boils down to the suspensory deal. I think it will boil down to your farrier and a little bit how you train. And that probably is going to, any cutting horse person that listens to this is probably going to be really mad at my opinion, but it is my opinion. And I'm a big believer on horseshoers. Like, I've been very fortunate the last, maybe 10 years. I've had probably two of the greatest farriers that ever walked this earth, in my opinion. The first one was Nathan Powell. When I got introduced to him, he totally changed my world as far as how much sounder he could keep my horses. Because again, being a trainer, we get horses from all over. And for example, when he first started shoeing for me, I had a stud that, it was interesting because the vet that I've used my whole career, I still use, and he'd actually worked on this horse when it was with another trainer. When Nathan got here, by the second reset, I think they told me every 3 months they were injecting that horse's front feet. And when Nathan started shoeing that horse after the second reset, we never injected his front feet ever. And I had that horse for almost 2 years.
Wow.
It really showed me the farrier makes a huge difference on the soundness. And then the farrier I use now is Mark Curry, and he actually had worked for Nathan for 6 years. He was working for Nathan when Nathan retired. He'd been on his own, but he'd been working for Nathan right before Nathan decided to retire. So when he retired, I
Grabbed him.
Grab Mark. And then there's lots of other things you can do, and we do. Like, we have some people that come and work on our horses on a fairly regular basis. And I guess the easiest way to explain it would be osteopath. It's not even really that. It's this guy has his own unique way of doing things. And it's really hard for me to kind of explain it to anybody. But the one thing I guess I can tell you, and it's been this way my whole life, if I didn't think it worked, I don't use it. And I don't care what anybody tells me. And of course, in our business, I've had everybody and everything come through the barn wanting to tell me how they're going to make my horses better and save the horse and blah, blah, blah. And 99% of it never worked. And when my uncle actually introduced me to this guy, and I was pretty sour on those kind of people at that time, because my customers were spending lots of money and none of it was really working. Horses would feel better for 3 days, but it wasn't making any changes. And anyways, this fellow definitely has made a lot of changes in our program as far as helping the horses stay sound. Like I said, our injuries are way down. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because again, we are in a sport that we are asking a lot of them all the time. But between him and my farrier, and then just, Marla's great at feeding these horses. They're always fed very well. Like, she's always trying to keep up on the minerals and supplements and stuff that actually work for the horses and help their joints and their bodies grow. And then lastly, probably the other reason, what I do, again, I'm not your typical horse trainer. I don't stay in that arena all the time. I do go out and use my horses in the feedlot, and I cowboy on them, and I brand calves on them, and I ride them horses up in the forestries. I try to make them still be horses. And I'm a firm believer that really helps keep the soundness, because those horses, tendons and ligaments move with the ground. They trip over rocks or step in holes, and they got to learn to get over that. I have hurt the odd one because they're not smart enough to place their feet where they should be. I guarantee you I've made way more better horses because of it than not. Just my way of doing it. And so far it's been working.
But it's interesting because it does speak to also their minds. I would imagine it's a good thing for their brain to be getting out and about and doing these other things. And I was nodding while you were talking about the blacksmith and what I would call I think, osteo people, because again, in the sport of jumping, I know myself, the farrier is everything in terms of keeping your horse sound. And I also, like you, had tried, chiropractors and massage therapists and hadn't really had much success. And then this past year discovered these people that I consider magical elves that come in, and they've worked on race horses, jumpers, you name it. And the first time they treated my horse, I came to see him afterwards, and he was lying down in the stall, stretched out, almost asleep. And I'd never seen him like that in the 3 years that I had owned him. So I knew they had done something. It's interesting, to your point, that all of these disciplines that we participate in have very similar foundations as far as what works for the horse.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think if true horse people always try to listen to their horse. Honestly, that's not always the easiest, but if you really, especially in today's day and age, and with our cell phones, and I mean, I'm not, my phone's going off constantly, but it's interesting when I can go somewhere and my phone doesn't work and I'm just riding my horse, whether I'm working a cow, like in a cutting deal, or just out doing the other things that I do, it's so much easier to understand or listen to your horse and know what he needs, you know? So there's lots
Mhm.
of times I know this maybe sounds a little weird, but if I can just go take them colts and go check some cattle or go move some cattle in the hills where I know my phone will not ring. It won't, you know, it's one thing everybody tells me to go, I'll put it on vibrator, put it on silence. Well, it doesn't matter. I know it works. And it bugs me if I know somebody's trying to get a hold of me and I can't get it. But when I go somewhere where there is no cell service and I know nobody can get a hold of me, it gives me an opportunity to sometimes figure out what those horses need a little bit more of, whether it is mentally just getting out of the pen or whether I need to get somebody to come work on them or change the shoeing up on them, or sometimes person just needs to get somewhere where it's real quiet, and today's technology doesn't cloud our minds and we can actually listen to what the horse wants instead of what we think they want, you know.
Well, that's fascinating because I actually recently interviewed an animal communicator. She's become quite well used in the last couple of years out on the West Coast in Oregon and California. And I was wondering, is that something that is used in your sport at all? Like, it was fascinating to me. I went in with an open mind to begin with, but by the time I finished chatting with her, I was convinced she was the real deal, and it was so helpful. She just even gave some suggestions as far as improving communication with your animal and doing exactly what you are doing already, going to a quiet place where you're just interacting with them and really listening to them. And she talked about playing with your horse, but under their rules, playing what they want to play, not what you want to play, and just basically spending time quietly with them out in the field doing nothing. But it was really interesting to me because I felt like that's exactly correct when you talk about how busy our world is, and we're doing 100 other things while we're getting the horse ready, and just that time when you're tacking them up and untacking them, that's again bonding time where you can listen to your animal.
Yeah, that I'm not sure if it's the same person or not, but I have had some customers over the years use a lady, and I'm going to probably guess that it might be this lady, but I have no experience. I've never talked to her, but I know the few customers that have done it in the past have had some success with it. Like, I don't know a lot about that kind of side of it. I just know, like, right now it's funny because growing up, I remember not having a cell phone. And when we got the cell phones and we were like, man, this is awesome. We can talk to whoever when we want. And whatever it's been 20, 30 years later, now I'm throwing this thing against my dash in my truck, hoping it breaks so it doesn't ring and I don't have to talk to anybody.
So another question I did have is, how young do you start training horses for cutting?
But we'll be definitely say January 1st here. I'll be starting them. I mean, I've been messing with the ones that I own, Marlin I own a little bit more, mostly because those ones I don't have super halter broke yet. So I got to get them a little more gentle. Say January here, if they're coming 2-year-old year, we start them. And I'll stay on them like relatively steady. Like, I don't, over the years, I mean, customers, they always, because it is an expensive sport. I get it. I totally understand that side of it because like I said, I own a lot of horses, so I know the expense. I don't really like sending horses home like ever till we're done either showing them or showing them after the 3-year-old year. If they go home, that's fine. But from a 2-year-old on here, I like to try and stay on them steady, not hard, but just steady, progressing them. Because again, I'm a big believer. I try to get them colts as gentle as I can with more than just the cutting part. So, I mean, I'll swing my rope on them, drag some logs, tarps, flags. I mean, I'll try to sack them out the best I can that way and have them to where down the road, obviously, if they don't make cutting horses, we can automatically just move them into another sport and it's not a big deal. If they continue to progress in the cutting, obviously, we just kind of try to keep chipping away. And in the summer months, and definitely the fall, probably more so the fall when their shows are on, I'm shipping cattle. Those 2-year-olds are going to get a week off here and there anyways. at our place. So I think I figured it out one time. I think they end up getting like 3 months off just periodically, just not 3 months at one time. So it's
Mhm.
not like we're on them super hard. But I've
No.
found over the years, like if we ever run into a problem down the road, especially as a 3-year old, say they do get a little sore and we got to give them some time off, or they get sick, something like that, I can give them the proper amount of time off and not be behind the 8 ball to have them ready to be showing as like we show them in the fall of their 3-year-old year.
Okay.
Uh, I don't know what that is. That's like 15, 16 months or whatever we'd end up riding them. But if I have to give them a bit of time off, I can, and it's not a big deal. It's really hard in this. The biggest downfall to cutting is we do have time limits. Like we got to show them horses, like I said, in the fall of the 3-year-old year. For example, I did have a horse last year that we did not show, or sorry, it'd be this year still, as a 3-year-old, because she did end up having a colic surgery when she was 2 and impaction surgery when she was 2.
Mhm.
She missed 3-4 months there, so we did not show her because of it. And I'll probably get her caught up this winter for sure. But I will admit, the days when I first started, you could not show them as a 3-year-old and bring them in as a 4-year-old and still be competitive. Unfortunately, nowadays, that's pretty dang tough. Like they kind
Mm.
of have to be in the program. Well, I missed all the shows with this one, and there'll be a few winter cuttings here that I'll take her to. And if the mare's good enough, she'll catch up, because she never really was ever out of the program other than the time she was recovering from the surgery. So I believe this mare will be fine. Like she'll catch up. But I've had people that have had horses that got seriously injured, like say they lose 6, 8 months. And I don't want to be that person, but I'm going to have to be. Usually they don't ever rise to the level that we need them to be as a 4 or 5, 6-year-old. Now, again, there's exceptions to every rule. So I'm sure there's somebody can tell me a story of a horse that did it. And we've had them in the past. I'm not saying we haven't, but
Mhm.
a general rule is the competition's just gotten so tough that it's just real hard on them horses to catch up. And I'll be honest, now there's so many other avenues that create, like for example, the roping deal, and I use that because it's a world that I live in also. A lot of these cutting horses, if they got a little bit of size, we go rope on them, and there's just as much money or more now in the roping to win as the cutting. So 10 years ago it wasn't that way, but now
Mhm.
we can move those horses if they don't quite fall into the mold of what we want. I'm pretty fortunate. I got good customers, so I'm getting them trained to where it's like, if we're not going to win a bunch in the cutting, let's go rope on them, or let's go do something else, because there's way more opportunities for those horses to be successful, just maybe in a different sport. You know?
Mhm. Which sounds lovely because ultimately you want that horse to be good at what it is they do, so they want to do it.
Yeah.
Along that same vein, I was curious. Now, I know you were saying you start them at 2. When would you actually get on their back? Would that also be as a 2-year-old then?
Oh yeah. Within about 2 or 3 days after I put a saddle on them.
Wow, that is
Yeah.
impressive. Okay,
Yeah. Like
I had no idea.
say in the first 10 days, from the time I say start one, like if, for example, if you brought me a 2-year-old today that was halter broke ish, he would have to be very touchy and very wild for me not to be on him within 4 or 5 days. Usually I'm on him in about 2 or 3 and
Okay.
riding. And then, like, I'm not saying I ride him forever. Like, I might only ride him 5 minutes. You know what I
Right.
mean?
That's still pretty impressive, it seems to me.
I was very fortunate again growing up. I got to learn from, in my opinion, the best guys in the world as far as starting colts. My dad was awesome to me as far as, there was a fellow called Brian Newbert, and I don't know if you know him, but anyways, he grew up beside Bill Dorrance. He was neighbors to Bill Dorrance, and he worked for Ray Hunt and all them. And I just admired Brian's deal. He was, at that time when I was like 10ish, he was traveling up here. He would make a circle in the summer and do a bunch of clinics up here. So when I was 14, my dad allowed me, it's funny nowadays, I would probably not let my kid do this, but I got on a bus to Edmonton, and then plane and flew to California and spent 7 weeks or 6 weeks or 7 weeks with Brian when I was 14, and starting colts with him. And my dad taught me a lot of like how to cowboy and obviously get the basics, but Brian Newbert definitely changed my world as far as like starting colts and just getting in a horse's mind. So that's been my background on starting colts. It's kind of funny. I explained this to somebody one time. I probably learned it backwards to everybody. I feel like I learned how to start a colt real well, and in my opinion, the proper way. And then I will admit, over the years, I got to skipping a lot of those steps. You know, you get into your 20s and early 20s. In certain situations I was in, I kind of got forced into just skipping those steps and trying to get by. And I got pretty good at getting by. It didn't make the horses any better. And I got a really good friend now, Kelly Cornforth, that, I've known Kelly like close to 20 years, probably 15, 20 years. And same thing. He really good friends with Joe Walters, and Kelly's a heck of a horseman himself. And I don't know now, I'd say like 10ish, maybe 15, 10ish years. Kelly got to saying, hey, you probably shouldn't be skipping those steps and blah, blah, blah. And it's funny, his famous saying to me always is, he's like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I will admit, the last 10 years, I've probably reminded myself of how to do a better job starting those colts that I knew when I was 11 and 15. But I was explaining to Destrian and another guy the other day, it was really good because I learned, in my opinion, I learned a really good way to start colts. And then I kind of went a lot of years, and I'm not saying I didn't go all the way back to the old cowboy way of blind and fold one and snubbing it to a post. I'm not getting at that, but I got really good at just basically saddling them up and getting on and by. Like, I could get them gentle, but I was just getting by. That didn't mean somebody else was going to get by, but I could.
Well, and to be fair, sometimes I imagine that's what you have to do.
Yeah, in the situations I was in, that was probably, I had to do it at that time. I can honestly tell you my horses were not better. So, for example, now when I start a colt in 3 months, they're usually pretty gentle. Usually not the one thing at two of these cutting horses, we breed them to work a cow, but in the part that nobody ever talks about with the way we breed these horses to work a cow, we do breed some of them to be pretty hot-minded, pretty tough-minded, so when I say in 3 months, I can usually have them pretty gentle, that doesn't mean all of them, because some of them are so hot-minded and tough-minded, it takes sometimes a lot longer because of how we've bred them. But I guess what I can say is 3 months, the way I do it now, is a lot better than 3 months ago, 10 years ago. Like 10 years ago in 3 months, you might still want to have your hammer cocked when you stepped on them. They might still want to buck you off. But now in 3 months, Marta could step on them and lope them around for me, and I know they're not going to buck, kind of a thing. So we were kind of joking about it the other day. I just kind of went about everything a little bit backwards. But now when people ask me, I can definitely tell them, like, well, you can do it this way, and this is probably what's going to happen, or you can do it this way, and this is probably what's going to happen. I'm fortunate I did get to live kind of two lives that way. But again, I'm super glad I learned from Brian, and I've gotten to know Joe Walters quite a bit better. And those guys to me are just phenomenal horsemen. I really hope those guys, maybe it is somebody like myself that needs to pass it on. But when those guys quit doing it, I do truly believe we are going to lose a generation of horsemen that we might not ever see guys that good again, because the world's changed.
I love that your father gave you that opportunity. I would imagine he must have recognized a gift in you, that he did send you on that journey to California. And kudos to him for giving you that chance to do it. And that does lead me, when you just said about where the sport is and what is going to happen to the sport. That seems to be a common theme across all equine sports right now. So I am curious, where do you think your sport is going? What do you feel are the challenges that you face right now?
Yeah, that's a really loaded question. Probably get myself in trouble for this one.
Everybody says that, by the way.
I honestly, there's going to be, I probably ain't going to have a very good answer for you because I really don't know. But I can tell you this. I do believe cutting in Texas and cutting in Canada are two different things right now. I do know cutting in Canada's in some trouble, in my opinion. I'm also going to say that cutting in Texas is in trouble, but it's for two different ways. Cutting in Texas, there's always been a lot of money. I mean, obviously that's the heart of it. There's tons of money. I see a big separation coming throughout cutting Canada and US, as far as you're going to have your elites that have the endless amounts of money, can spend whatever they want on horses. There's going to be the top 20 trainers that are going to be able to get their hands on that in the world. I'm talking 20 trainers in the world. And then you're going to see The rest of it, you're just going to see different divisions of it. There's been a theory on the cutting that it's going to end up like the race or the race car deal, where you're going to have your Indy 500s and then you're going to have your dirt track type deals. Kind of see that happening in cutting. You're going to have your elite cutters, your elite cuttings and shows, and then you're going to have your little bit more your grassroots type cuttings. We already have that on the go. I don't really particularly think that's a huge problem. I think it needs to be managed. I do think a huge separation is not good. I think there needs to be a little bit more like, so for example, 15 years ago, definitely 20 years ago, there was a lot of cuttings in the Northwest, here in Canada, like Western Canada, obviously, throughout Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, Montana, Washington, Colorado, Oregon, like all the northern states. A big series of shows. Like you could go literally when I was going hard, almost every weekend somewhere. And now, this is a guess, so don't anybody crucify me for this. I bet you over half of them shows are gone now. That's why I say there's a huge separation. Like you either, like right now, obviously in Alberta, Canada, Alberta's the place to, like if you're going to go to a cut, and it's Alberta. Saskatchewan's got a couple left. BC maybe has one or two left, and the rest are in Alberta. There's, honestly, I'm sure maybe there's some grassroots cuttings in Manitoba, kind of a little bit what goes on out there in Ontario and stuff. But even still, those guys go south a lot across to some cuttings. But the part that I think where the middle ground is lost is those cuttings in the Northwest. Because I remember, for example, there was a big cutting called the Western National Finals, and it used to be in Ogden, Utah. Everybody went. So it pulled people from everywhere. Maybe not a lot of the Texans. Everybody. I don't care. You were California, Canada, Oregon, Washington, Nebraska, South Dakota. Like everybody went there. It was a 10-day cutting. It was phenomenal. When they ended that, there's the Western and the Eastern, and the Eastern was more down in that Louisiana, Alabama type area. To me, those were two of the best cuttings in the industry because it brought everybody in the industry together on a bit of a level playing field. You're always going to have your elite guys that are in Texas that, go to the fraternities, the big shows, the super stakes, the summer show. But those shows I thought brought the whole industry together as a whole. We don't have them anymore. In 2010, we had a EHV1 outbreak in Ogden, Utah. So they kind of shut it down. We had a few after that. I remember we went to Denver and Reno, and they kind of bouncing around for a few years. So I don't remember the exact year when it finally was just done. But I'm going to say around 2015, 16, somewhere in there. I just can't exactly remember. But I think that hurt the industry. That was the start of bigger separation. I mean, I personally would like to see something like that come back again because it was such a good deal for the industry as a whole. I really do. They've tried, like we haven't, the NCHA's tried. They have a Aurora finals thing now and different things, but it's not the same, have the same effect as it did.
But it's so interesting that you're saying this because, as I said, all of your sentiments have been echoed by the jumper industry in Canada. It's the same thing. It's become a very elite sport. It's very much out of reach for a lot of people to be able to compete. And it has shifted the way people approach the sport. So it's just interesting to hear that that's the challenge that you feel that you're facing. Just don't know, is it a money thing in Canada? Is it because there's such exceptionally wealth in the States that it just has priced some of these sports out of everybody's reach? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it has. And the part where I'm going to get myself in a lot of trouble here is, in my opinion, it's a lack of respect as a whole in the industry. Okay. So when I started, cutting was in a very elite, I always called it the king of cowboy sports. When I started, whether I agreed with a trainer or a person, I still showed them respect for their opinion or for what they had done or whatever. Now, this is a little bit society as a whole. We've lost respect for each other. I think it's really filtered over to where there's too much of me, and not the group, if that makes sense. We have a lot of people in the industry that they're more worried about their own little deal, like their own little me, my circle, my horses, my life, my money. And I understand how that is. I mean, obviously it's easy to say the trainers are in the same boat. It's always about them and their business and their crew and their little inner circle. I'm saying we're all to blame, but I do really feel there's been such a lack of respect for the trainers, for the horses. I'm even going to go with the cattle, the people that own the cattle, because now I'm on both sides of the card as far as I own the cattle, so I know how much money I'm shoveling out to have these things and how much and how little I'm actually making. You know, if I send those cattle to an event, yeah, I'm not, they're cattle. Sometimes they're really good, sometimes they're not. And I got somebody yelling and screaming at me, my cattle suck. And pretty soon, you know, those cattle guys look at it, go, man, for what I'm making, you know, I'm getting, you know, shit on. Why would I send these cattle for as little as I get? So that's what I'm saying, is that it's the respect for the whole sport and in all aspects. The people that make the sport go around or make it actually work do get a little fed up and kind of go, well, fine, I don't need to do that. Like, I don't need to send my cattle, or I don't need to send you a horse to ride. Or, and again, that's really a vague answer to your question, because it is, I think it's maybe a more of a society problem than it is a cutting problem. But I do think it's really filtered into our sport, because again, when you're dealing with people with a lot of money, and I'm not singling them out, because honestly, I have rode for the single mom that's working 2 jobs to pay her training bill. And then I've also worked for the guys that have their own private jets. At this moment, I actually, you know, the guy that owns his jets, one of my best customers, and the single mom's one of my best customers. But I've spent 20 some years weeding the bad customers out, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I'm maybe in a hair bit different situation than a lot of trainers, but I just see it as an industry because, for example, I settle a lot of herds at a cutting everywhere. If I don't do my job right, or if it's not what everybody thinks it should be, I mean, I'm the first person they're getting after. Well, it comes a time where I look at it and I, you know, and even the show producers will get after me. And I'll bring an extra 3 or 4 horses to a cutting. Most trainers bring 1 turnback horse. I bring 3 or 4. And I look at it, there's days where I look at it and go, what? I'm not making no money doing it. Bringing all those extra horses, I got to pay for those stalls. That's more fuel. That's more another truck and trailer down the road. The cost that I have to make sure I have enough horses there to settle those herds is astronomical, and nobody pays for it. My customers don't pay for it. And so it does come to a point where you get shit on enough for that kind of stuff. You finally go, well, why would I do it? Instead of somebody going up and being, hey, thanks for doing that job. I mean, those cows look tough today, or thanks for being there and turning back for me all day. Like, it does. I'm not saying we have to be financially
Compensated, but just be thanked.
I go to, I mean, another thing that I do is I pick up bucking horses, you know, at rodeos and different things. And I'll go to a practice, or I'll go to a rodeo and pick up bucking horses. And I mean, every single person will come and thank me, whether I did a good job or not. And I'll go to a cutting. Probably my customers will be the only ones that thank me. Probably be the only one. I'll be honest, I grew numb to it in my sport till I got going out and doing it. Like, because again, Destry is kind of going in a different direction. The cutting deal, he ropes and wants to rodeo and stuff. So I'm getting back into that world a little bit with him. So when I go into a different world and I see how it is, it kind of reminds me how far our sport has went the other way, as far as a little lack of respect is the best way I can put it. You know, just a little bit of gratitude to be, and maybe that's a better way to put it, is we've lost a bit of the gratitude to be able to do the sport we do, because yes, it costs a lot of money. But anybody that's had an opportunity to get on a good cutting horse and work a cow, it is poetry in motion. It is the king of cowboy sports, as far as I'm concerned, to this day. You know, and I have been very fortunate. I've rode reiners and cow horses, and I've rode a couple jumpers, and I've done a little bit of a lot. And I mean, I know enough to be dangerous, sort of thing. But
well, that actually leads me to, I wanted to let you know that I had the opportunity to ride a horse that you trained called Annie's Little Cut.
Oh, yeah.
It was the only time that I've ever tried cutting. It was a lot of fun. It was very different from what I expected. But that horse, wow, that horse was very well trained. It knew its job, even though I had no clue what I was doing. One of the things that I thought was interesting that I noticed is the ground is very deep in arenas for cutting. Why is that? That's something that's very different from the jumper world.
Well, that's to help the horse in their stops and turns. It's to help with the percussion of those horses getting in the ground. Now there is a science behind it. Another topic I could get in trouble with.
That's okay.
Because in my opinion, a lot of people do not have the ground right. And that's going back to one of your earlier questions. That is definitely another thing that can
causes injuries.
Causes injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And I will admit, probably most of my injuries, I guess, to go back a little bit, not to get off track here, but if I've hurt a horse, it's usually been at a show because of bad ground. It's one of those things, it's a fine line. You want it deep enough that those horses can stop and hold the ground and still be able to turn, but not too deep that they have a whole bunch of, I guess maybe the best way to look at it is like when you're playing volleyball. If you got too deep a ground, you can't move around to get to that ball. But if it's not deep enough, you're going to bang your knees and your ankles and your feet. So it's a little bit the same. You want just deep enough that you can get in that ground and get stopped, be able to brace yourself to make the next move, to be ready to make the next move, but not too deep that the ground's actually a hindrance and you're struggling in it just as much as if it's too shallow, you're gonna hell out of your legs and the horse's legs and stuff like that. So it's fine line, but you just want it deep enough that it helps the horse be able to do his maneuvers.
That is, again, another parallel between jumping and cutting is the footing. It can be everything in terms of potential injuries. I just wanted to finish with a couple of questions. One of them you just talked about, and one thing that I know that you're doing that is new is this pickup riding. So I guess I thought you were picking up the riders, but you're picking up the horses
Well,
or the bulls.
I'm picking up the
Okay.
buck or the riders off the bucking horses. Yeah, like
Okay.
and then like in the bull riding, we don't really do anything other than rope the bulls that don't want to leave the arena and get them out of the arena.
Mm-hmm.
But it was something so we're really fortunate here where we live. We have I'm only 5-6 miles from a town called Nanton. In the summer, they have a series called the Nanton Nights. It's I think it runs 6 weeks, and every week it's a local rodeo. And in this area, we're very fortunate. We are very blessed around here to have like multiple world champions and multiple superstar athletes in the rodeo world, whether it's barrel racing to saddle bronc riding, calf roping. This year, JD Struckness is married to a lady that's just west of town. He just won the world in the steer wrestling. I mean, yeah, the list is huge. We've got Clay Elliott's NFR bronc rider. Dustin Flunger's made the NFR. Lindsey Sears has won the world. Like the list goes on and on and on. Maybe not everybody lives in this area anymore, but most of them do. So we have this rodeo, and I don't remember. It was a long time ago. I think it was by accident. They needed somebody to pick up at one of these local deals. And I did it. I had a couple horses that could do it at the time. And I guess I should maybe rephrase that. I got into it because of roping bulls. It's another venture in my life. I got into buying bucking bulls one time. Very not good profitable, so I don't suggest it to anybody. I was buying bucking bulls, and they had this is when they started having some of these bucking bull fraternities. And so then I would go, one of the guys that was behind it all, he got me to go and I'd rope these bulls at these fraternities if they didn't leave the arena. And so I got into roping bucking bulls at some bull ridings and fraternities around here. And then that kind of led into the picking up the bucking horses at these local deals. But again, it was just all for fun. It was nothing, I wasn't serious about any of it at the time. And then at the same time, I got some really good horses in the cutting. That was really ramping up. So obviously that all went to the side. And like I said, I would do it if somebody called me, but it was definitely, I sold those horses that I had at the time to another fellow that was actually doing more of a career at it. And then I don't know how many years ago now, it hasn't been very long, like less than 5. There's a really good friend of mine here, Strand Slosher. He picks up for Wayne Vold, like picks up at Pinoca, like all the big ones around here. He's a very talented young guy. And his dad was Blake Slosher. He's a legend in that business. And again, we rope there almost every day. So I've gotten to be really good friends with those guys. Well, anyways, he was gone to a rodeo somewhere, and they needed somebody to pick up at a high school rodeo in Nanton. And they called me, and I said, I don't have any horses, and I haven't done it for a while, and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, look, we got nobody, and you're the only one that's kind of done it a little bit. Another buddy of mine that was going to pick up, I think he'd done it once. So those poor kids, we didn't want to tell them at the time, but definitely we were not the most experienced pickup team out there. But what got me addicted to it again was it's a bit of a funny story. So Strand had left a horse because I didn't have a horse. So Strand had left a horse there at the rodeo. Another friend of ours had left another horse there for this other friend of mine. So we get there, and me and my buddy are going, well, which horse do you want? Because neither one of us knew these horses. And anyways, my buddy goes, well, I'm picking this one because I know that horse a little bit. I don't know this one of Strand's. And I said, well, I'll take Strand's. How bad can it be? You know, like this guy does it for, Strand does it for a living. Long story short, the rodeo starts. I'm riding this horse around. I eventually figured out it was like literally their best pickup horse, which was so cool. I'll never forget this. I'm sitting by the chutes, and this horse was fidgeting a little bit, and I'll be honest, and I've even told Strand this, I'll be honest, I was kind of a little bit like, man, this horse don't feel very good for if he's supposed to be a pickup horse, and he's kind of fidgeting. And I'm not gonna lie, the second that kid crawled down on the chute on that bucking horse, that horse stood there like a statue. His ears were up, watch him. They crack the gate, the kid comes out, horse is bucking away. And obviously, they ride him for 8 seconds. I am not lying to you. I'll guarantee you that horse could count in his head because at 6, 7 seconds, you couldn't have pulled on that horse hard enough to stop him. And I mean, he just takes off like a shot dog, right straight to that bucking horse, right in position, stayed there. I could do everything that I needed to get the kid, the flank, the shank, whatever I needed. That horse was just, like I said, when you ride a great cutting horse, the feeling of that, well, this was the same kind of a deal. Like this horse, literally, I could have not had a bridle on him and he'd have done that job. Like he was just amazing.
That had to be a rush.
Oh man, I sat there and I was like, I'm like, I shouldn't have done this because now I'm addicted again, kind of a thing. That was kind of the start of it. Well, then I just did, I was at the start, it was just playing around. I really wasn't being super serious about it, but I had another horse that was sent to me, same kind of deal. He was a bit of a runaway. I just used him in the cowboy lifestyle. I was doctoring yearlings on him and different things. And I got this horse to where he's pretty good. They had a ranch bronc riding in town. And I think that weekend over 2 days, they bucked like 52 head of horses. And my buddy was picking up at it. And I phoned him. I said, hey, I got this horse. For some reason, I think he'd make a pickup horse. And can I just come tag along with you? And I said, I'll just stay out of your guys' way. I just want to see if this horse, we were trying to figure out what this horse was going to be. He goes, well, yeah, but you got to ride my colts. He said, if you pick up on my colts, you can bring yours. I said, yeah, I got no problem doing that. Well, anyways, I ended up picking up this horse I had was a born natural, and the horse he had was real good too. So I ended up picking up a bunch that weekend, and again got more of the itch. And so, for example, this year I did 11 rodeos between the ranch rides and actual rodeos because I've been doing it more. I'm getting to meet. Interesting part, I'm getting to meet guys that I knew 25 years ago that were cowboys that I grew up in the same kind of world I did, and lots of people that I knew when I was a kid, and I'm really enjoying it because it is a rush. Like I don't care what anybody says, when you get a horse that is brave enough to run into a bucking horse, or I know this sounds really bad, but even if when a bareback rider hangs up and it's life or death, and I mean it is life or death for that guy, and it's my job to save him. And I have a horse that basically will ride into hell with me. It's a feeling that I can't really describe because it's not every horse does it. Not every horse is willing to run into a horse that's bucking and bellering and somebody's dragging and the wreck's on. And I've got to get there and get that horse roped and save that guy. And that horse, to have a horse that can do that, it's a feeling that it is. I don't know how to explain it until you get to just experience it. It's the same as the cut. It's just a different rush, different sport, but different rush.
That leads me to my last question, which I feel like you've almost answered, which is what gives you joy in the sport? And before you answer, I was going to say, it seems to me like because you're constantly learning and you're going down different paths and you're probably never bored. At this point in your career, what gives you the greatest joy?
Probably can't answer that right now, other than the fact that I love the horses. I mean, obviously the cutting deal, picking up the roping, whatever. I'm always trying to strive to be a better horseman. I don't know if it's fortunately or unfortunately nowadays, obviously we got to make a lot of money to survive in any business. So my goal every day, whatever I do, I want to make as much money as I can, but never lose my integrity for the horse, for the heritage of being a cowboy, I guess, because I truly believe and know that there is, as corny as this is going to sound, there's not a lot of real cowboys left. There's a lot of people that dress like cowboys, and there's a lot of people that think they're cowboys. But the famous saying is everybody wants to be a cowboy till there's cowboy shit to do. And that is so true. And I mean, I live in a world that It does not, I grew up, it does not matter how bad it is, how cold it is, how stormy, how whatever, how hot. If that horse needs to be tended to, or those cattle need to be tended to, you do it. Like it doesn't matter. I don't know how to explain it, because that's the problem with it, is it's hard to explain because you have to be born into it and made. Like there's people that I've met over my life that didn't grow up in the same kind of world as me, and they're as cowboy as they can be. And then I've seen guys that grew up in the same kind of world, and I tell you what, they just wear a hat and boots, but they ain't no cowboy, you know. And for me, that's a wide description, because being a cowboy, there's a lot of things that go along with it. But I guess that's what brings me joy is I don't care if it's a cutting horse, whether I'm riding one of my pickup horses, one of my rope horses, or even out there working my dogs in the feedlot, or it's just being able to be better every day at what I do. So if I guess you could say I have a little bit of ADD. It is hard for me to stick to one deal. I just get bored if I'm just cutting, or I'm just roping, or I'm just picking up bucking horses. But the best guys that I was ever around, they could do anything and everything, and they were good at all of it. It wasn't, you know, like everybody says, a jack of all trades, master of none. And I don't really agree with that. I want to be a jack of all trades and master at everything, because if I can master everything, then I truly am a good cowboy. And I want to be able to make money doing it. You know, I think the Western lifestyle is kind of programmed to be thought we should do all this and be poor. Well, why? Why do we got to be poor and broke? Why can't we make money? We work. Honestly, I told somebody, if I worked this hard at a job that actually made money, I'd be a billionaire already. And it's not made. I'm not made to go sit at a desk and trade oil stocks and stuff like that. I mean, I don't see any enjoyment in that, but I do see that, you know what, if I train a really good cutting horse or a rope horse, or I want to sell it for some real money, or a good dog, I want to sell it for some money, because it takes a lot of time and effort. And there's a lot of them that don't work, because all of it is a very specific sport. And it's like I said, you can't just go buy one off the internet or out of the auction market and be like, well, that horse is going to be a cutting horse, or that horse is going to be a pickup horse. I got to go train them, get the basics on them, and then introduce them to that world and find out what they can and can't do. And, you know, obviously the cutting is a lot of the breeding. The roping and the pickup, we can venture off into some quote unquote, maybe off-bred bloodlines, and you'll find some diamonds in the rough a little bit more than in the cutting. In saying that, that takes a lot of work, time, and effort. And I just feel that we should be compensated a bit for it. I'm not saying we got to be multi-millionaires out of it, but to work for nothing is a little bit silly in my mind. So long-winded answer is the enjoyment is just doing what I do every day, you know.
I would say I really appreciate your candor and your authenticity. I think that's what's separating you maybe from others in the field, is you do come across as very genuine and authentic. And I think that speaks volumes to who you are as a person and your connection with the animals. And to your point, fair enough, you should be compensated. As you said, it doesn't have to be millions, but you do want to get compensated for the efforts that you put out. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it.
Thank you again so much, Dustin. Really appreciated your time and energy and thoughtfulness in your answers to the questions I had. And I really think the listeners will appreciate your story.
Well, I hope so.
If you'd like to learn more about upcoming guests and the podcast, please feel free to follow me on Instagram at Horsetails with Cat.